Hello! In this video I'm going to go over some derivation advice for the more complex derivations we've been doing more recently. So there are two sorts of challenges broadly that these derivations present us with. The first is how to set them up, and the second is their open-ended character. So setup has been discussed in a previous video in another module, which I've put into this module as well. But then, what about, and so you might want to check that out, but then what about open-ended derivations? So that's what this video will be focused on. And in the end, I'll have the 6 steps sort of formulated in a way that address the open-ended character of the derivations we're working with. Beneath this video, there's a PDF that has the 6 steps on one side, the new formulation, which we'll get to, and on the other side has the setup, all the different ways to set up a derivation. So please print that out or download it and use it. Have it handy when you're working on your derivations. Really, for real, it will be very helpful. Okay, so setup, as I said, take a look at the previous derivation setup video and the attached PowerPoint if you want, or just you can look at the PDF that's in this on this page. And do print out this PDF and use it. Okay, so with elimination rules like MP and MT, and then later simplification in BC and MTP, their use is pretty straightforward. We just look and see, do we have what we need to apply the rule? And if we do have what we need to apply the rule, we apply it. And if we don't have what we need to apply the rule, then we don't. And that's kind of it with elimination rules. Of course, you can't complete derivations using just elimination rules that are already ready to go, so there's more to doing derivations than that. But with elimination rules, it's straightforward. You just have to know what they look like, be able to find them, and then apply them. But we now have derivations that have becoming more and more open-ended, where you don't just find, does the rule apply, and if it does, apply it. There are 3 reasons why not. The first is that we have introduction rules, and we have to decide, well, how are we going to use them? We have flexibility in using them, and so we have to decide how to use that flexibility. The second reason is that we can do subderivations, and again, there's a lot of flexibility with subderivations. We have to decide how to use that flexibility. And finally, we now have indirect derivation, and again, there's a lot of flexibility with indirect derivation, and that means we have to think about how we're going to use that flexibility. So I'm going to talk about the flexibility and sort of how to work with it that arises from each of these 3 sources. Okay, so introduction rules first. So what are they? Well, so P, Q, therefore P and Q, P, therefore not P, P, therefore P or Q. You could also have P, therefore Q or P. And if P, then Q, if Q, then P, then what? P, if and only if Q. So the question is, when should we apply these? Should we always apply them? No, we shouldn't, because you could always just apply, say, adjunction and addition, and you could always, the first 3 you could always just apply repeatedly, just going on and on and on and on without end. And so we have to know, when do we want to use them and when don't we want to use them? What sort of situations are we looking for? Well, when to apply them? Well, when it will help, of course, but the question is, help how? How do inference rules help us? Introduction rules help us. So I'm going to go and show 2 ways just briefly in the derivations module in which they do help us. So let's suppose we are in a derivation where the conclusion was if P, then Q or R. Who cares what the premises are? We're not actually going to do the whole derivation. I just want to illustrate an idea. So we would have started with an conditional assumption, and then who knows, we chug along. And let's say that at some point, we're moving along, and we get Q, and then we keep going. Well, at that point, we might have noticed, hey, what I need to box and cancel, one thing that will let me box and cancel is Q or R, because I'm trying to show a conditional. The consequent is Q or R, and what I need to box and cancel a conditional with CD is its consequent. So if I get Q or R, I can box and cancel with CD. And I might say, hey, look, I got to Q. Well, good. That means I can add, and I can form Q or R, and then I can box and cancel. So one reason why you would apply an introduction rule is like this, because when you do, it lets you box and cancel. why else might you apply an introduction rule? Well, suppose that you were trying to show z, and you probably make an indirect assumption, and let's suppose that one of your premises was p or q, then r, and you're chugging along, and at some point you get q, and you might think, hey, on line 3, I have that conditional, and I haven't used it, but if I get its antecedent, I can do modus ponens, and its antecedent is p or q. So if I can get p or q, I can do modus ponens. So, oh, and there's 8, and I can do addition with 8, and I can form p or q with addition on 8, and then I can apply modus ponens. Now, is r helpful? Depends upon what else is going on in the derivation. But this is the second reason why introduction rules are helpful, because they let you apply inference rules, apply elimination rules once you create the bigger sentence with the introduction rule. So there are really two situations when introduction rules will be helpful. When you're using an introduction rule, either what you get will allow you to box and cancel, like in the first example. You go from Q to Q or R, and then you can use Q or R to box and cancel. Second way that an introduction rule can help, it allows you to apply an elimination rule. Then you can, so in that example, we had if P or Q then R, we used Q to get P or Q, and then in modus ponens to get R, which would have been helpful. So those are the two ways that introduction rules can be helpful. Okay, good. What about subderivations? Subderivations also make derivations open-ended. Remember, you can enter any show line you like. Will you be able to box and cancel it? Maybe, maybe not. Will it be helpful if you box and cancel it? Maybe, maybe not. But you can try any show line you like. And so that's nice. That means show lines are flexible. But it's also not nice, because you have to ask yourself, which show line, or we have to ask ourselves, which show line should we do? Who knows, right? How do I know what show line to do? And that's because of their flexibility, we need to answer that question to choose which one to do, because we have lots of options. So, well, let's see. Let's again take a look in the derivations module and see what kinds of things subderivations can help us to do. So let's suppose that you're trying to show an argument whose conclusion is if P, then Q or R again. And again, you would have assumed P, and then who knows, you do some stuff with your premises. And at some point, and the assumption, and at some point, you get stuck. You can't get any further. Okay. So what would you do at this point? You would want to do a subderivation that will help you move the derivation forward, or to complete the derivation. And the way to complete the derivation is to box and cancel. So if you can do a subderivation that will help you to box and cancel, that's what you would do. So now we have to ask, what would help us to box and cancel? Well, it's a conditional. We can box and cancel conditionals with CD. We box and cancel conditionals with CD if we get the consequent. The consequent is Q or R. So if I get Q or R, then I can apply CD to box and cancel. So that's what we want to do. We want to say, let's see if we can show Q or R, and hopefully we can. And then we would say CD. And it would never, this sort of subderivation we might need to do another subderivation inside of it, but it's never going to hurt us. Again, if you're trying to show, let's say, P and Q, and you're stuck, well, you could say, okay, I'll show P, and then I will then show Q, and once I've completed these, I'll stick them together with a join, and then I have what I need for a direct derivation. So again, we think one reason why we would do subderivations, because they will help us to get what we need to box and cancel. Just like an introduction rule might help us to get what will let us box and cancel, so doing a subderivation will help us to get what we want to box and cancel. So that's one way in which a subderivation can help. The second way is just like with the inference rules. So again, let's suppose you're trying to show Z, and you would probably make an assumption. And now let's suppose that one of your premises is P if and only if Q, then R. And let's suppose you move along and eventually the derivation gets stuck. And so you want to do a subderivation. You think, what should I do a subderivation of? Well, if you said what, you could say, well, I could show Z, because if I get that, then I can finish the derivation. But this wouldn't be pointless. This wouldn't help you. You always want to do a new sentence. This is not a new sentence. You're trying to show Z already. So this isn't going to move the derivation forward. But you might think, well, maybe I could do a subderivation that would let me use line 3. So if you wanted to use line 3, you could say, well, if I get the antecedent, I can do modus ponens. If I get the antecedent, or the negation of the consequent, I can do MT. So maybe I will try to show the antecedent. And you know, hopefully you do, and then you would say 3, 6, MP, and you get R. And is R going to be helpful? Probably yes, depending upon what's going on in the derivation. But this illustrates the second way in which a subderivation can be helpful. Namely, it lets you apply an elimination rule. So just as with introduction rules, there are two reasons to do a subderivation. First, they let us box and cancel when the new sentence we're going to do a subderivation of, or it will allow us, the new sentence will allow us to apply an elimination rule. And when you're doing a subderivation, you always want to do a subderivation of a new sentence. If you do a subderivation of an old sentence, it's not going to let you do anything new in the main derivation. So always do a subderivation of a new sentence, something that you're not already trying to show, and something that's not already in the derivation on a line that you can apply a rule to. So always do a subderivation of a new sentence, because that will be helpful when you complete it. Okay, good. So what about indirect derivation? The third reason that our derivations are now more open-ended. Why are they? Well, so why does indirect derivation make things open-ended? You can apply ID to any contradiction, circle and not circle. P and not P and not P, if P then Q, not if P then Q, P and Q, not P and Q, and so on. Any contradiction will do. Anytime you have a sentence and its negation, you can apply ID. Now that's nice because it's flexible. There are lots of situations in which it can apply. But it's also not nice because then we have to think about which contradiction. We have to keep our eyes open for any contradiction whatsoever. We're not fixed on just one sentence. And that makes things more wide open. And in fact, there will always be many different possible contradictions, although some will be easier to get. So I just want to show you how there will be many different possible contradictions. So let's suppose we wanted to do this argument, to derive this argument. P, if P then Q, if Q then R, R. And so we'll start off show conclusion. And let's suppose that we made an indirect derivation assumption. We don't need to, but let's suppose we did. Okay? And then let's bring in our premises. What's going to happen is there are different ways we can get a contradiction. So we could say 3, 4 modus ponens, and then we could say 5, 6 modus ponens. And there's a contradiction we have 2, 7 ID. Yeah? But we could do it differently. We could say, oh, 2, 5 MT, and then 4, 6 MT, and then we have a contradiction between 3 and 7, and we could do 3, 7 ID. This time, previously it was R and not R, now it's P and not P. But we could even do it differently. We could say, okay, well I got not Q from line 2 and line 5, but now 3 and 4 will give me Q, and so now I have another contradiction. So you can see if there's one contradiction, there are frequently lots you can get. And that means that we have to sort of decide which way should we go. Now sometimes there are lots of ways to go, and sometimes it's not obvious which way to go. So that's a tricky issue, and I'm going to talk about that. But we need to recognize that with indirect derivation, any contradiction will do, and there are often different ways to get a contradiction. So how should we deal with all this open-ended madness? Well, we want to remember, when do we use introduction rules? When they will help us box and cancel or apply elimination rule. When will we do a subderivation? Well, only if it's a subderivation of a new sentence. And what new sentence? A new sentence that will help us box and cancel or apply an elimination rule. And we want to look for contradictions everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And there's one particularly combination here of these last two, things. If the derivation is stuck and you have a complex negation like not box if and only if circle, and box if and only if circle, that sentence would be new to the derivation, then you could try showing that conditional, and that biconditional, and why would you do that? Because then you can apply ID when you're done. So one thing is, when you have a big thing that's negated, you think, oh, I can do an indirect derivation with that thing. And you might either use an introduction rule or subderivation to get that big thing. But if there's a big negated thing, get the unnegation of it, because then you can apply ID, because it means you have a contradiction. Okay, so I've reorganized the 6 steps into 4 steps with slightly bigger steps. So the first thing, though, before we do any steps, is we always need to be asking ourselves, what will let me box and cancel? That's the most important question. With the early derivations, they were not so open-ended. The elimination rules were really driving us in one particular direction. You sort of got to what you needed to box and cancel pretty just by applying the elimination rules and not having to think about what will let me box and cancel. Now you need to think about it more, because you need to be that's going to guide your use of the flexible tools of introduction rules and subderivations and what contradictions you're looking for. Okay, so step 1, set up the derivation. So this is show conclusion, make your assumption, put in premises, but with a few complications that I talked about in another video. So on the back side of this sheet, which is below the video here, the different setups are printed there, so you can see them all on one sheet. And then the second part of and that's about basically shows and conclusion, shows and assumptions. And then you want to add the premises if you haven't already. So that's the setup stage. Then you're going to apply your inference rules, and as always, we apply elimination rules whenever we can. And then we apply introduction rules when it will help us with boxing and canceling, or with applying elimination rules. And one salient, important new way in which we can use introduction rules to box and cancel, or to help us box and cancel, is if we already have a negated sentence, we can use introduction rules to get to the unnegation. So if you have negation P if and only if Q, and you also have if P then Q, and you have if Q then P, then you can apply by CB to go from if P then Q and if Q then P to P if and only if Q, and that P if and only if Q contradicts not P if and only if Q, and so you can do ID. So you want to look for those opportunities to box and cancel with introduction rules, particularly if they're complex negations. Then, if the derivation gets stuck, do a subderivation of a new sentence, a sentence that is not in the derivation. And which one? Well, again, one that will let you box and cancel with CD or ID, or a sentence that will let you apply an elimination rule. And then, eventually you'll be done. You'll box and cancel with any of DD, CD, or ID. And please remember, always ask yourself, what will let me box and cancel? That's the key thing. What will let me box and cancel? That's always should be guiding your thinking about how to finish the derivation. And yeah, so good luck. I will do some there will be some example videos as well showing how to apply these steps and this kind of thinking. So I suggest you check those out as well. If you have questions, please let me know.